Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fourth week discussion. And today our subject is English. Before we are going to proceed to our discussion, let us first read the objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students should be able to A. Identify Chinese values and traditions reflected in the folktale. B. Enumerate the characters of the selection. And C. Determine Chinese and Filipino tradition reflected in the story. So, our topic for today is a selection entitled The Soul of the Great Bell, which is written by Lafcadio Hearn, 1850 1904. The water clock marks the hour in the tachungs, in the tower of the great bell. Now the mallet is lifted to smite the lips of the metal monster. The vast lips inscribed with Buddhist text from the sacred Fawa King, from the chapters of the holy Lingyan King, hear the great bell responding. How mighty her voice, though tongueless, Ko-Ngai. All the lacquer goblins on the palace cornices wriggle their fire-colored tongues. And after each huge shock, how wondrous the multiple echo and the great golden moan! And, at last, the sudden sibilant sobbing in the ears when the immense stone faints away in broken whispers of silver, as though a woman should whisper, Hiai! Even so, the great bell had sounded every day for well nigh 500 years. Ko-Ngai, first with stupendous clang, then with immeasurable moan of gold, then with silver murmuring of Yai, and there is not a child in all the many-colored ways of the old Chinese city who does not know the story of the Great Bell. Who cannot tell you why the Great Bell says Ko-Ngai and Hiyai? Now this is the story of the great bell in the Tachungs, as the same is related in the Pi Yao Tu Chu, written by the learned Yu Pao Tsin of the city of Kuang Tao Fu. Nearly 500 years ago, the celestially august, the son of heaven, Yonglo, and the illustrious Ming dynasty, commanded the worthy official Kuan Yu that he should have a bell made of such size that the sound thereof might be heard from 100 li. And he further ordained that the voice of the bell should be strengthened with brass, and deepened with gold, and sweetened with silver, and that the face of the great lips of it should be graven with blessed sayings from the sacred books, and that it should be suspended in the center of imperial capital to sound through all many colored ways of the city of Peking. Therefore the worthy Mandarin Kuan Yu assembled the master molders and the renowned bellsmith of the empire, and all men of great repute and cunning in foundry work. And they measured the materials for the alloy, and treated them skillfully, and prepared the molds, the fires, the instruments, and the monstrous melting pot for fusing the metal. And they labored exceedingly like giants, neglecting only rest and sleep in the comforts of life, toiling both night and day in obedience to Kuan Yu, and striving in all things to do the behest of the Son of Heaven. But when the metal had been cast, and the earthen moulds separated from the glowing casting, it was discovered that, despite their great labor and ceaseless care, the result was void of worth. For the metals had rebelled one against the other. The gold had scorned alliance with the brass. The silver would not mingle with the molten iron. Therefore the moulds had to be once more prepared, and the fires rekindled, and the metal remelted, and all the work tediously and toilsomely repeated. The Son of Heaven heard and was angry, but spoke nothing. A second time the bell was cast, and the result was even worse. Still the metals obstinately refused to blend one with the other, and there was no uniformity in the bell, and the sides of it were cracked and fissured, and the lips of it were slagged and split asunder, so that all the labor had to be repeated even a third time, to the great dismay of Kuan Yu. And when the Son of Heaven heard of these things, he was angrier than before, and sent his messenger to Kuan Yu with a letter, written upon lemon-colored silk, and sealed with the seal of the dragon, containing these words: From the mighty Yung Lo, the sublime Tate Sung, and celestial and august, whose reign is called Ming, to Kuan Yu, the Fu Yin. Twice thou hast betrayed the trust we have deigned graciously to place in thee. If thou fail a third time in fulfilling our command, thy head shall be severed from thy neck. Tremble and obey. Now Kuan Yu had a daughter of dazzling loveliness, whose name, Ko-Ngai, was ever in the mouths of poets, and whose heart was even more beautiful than her face. Ko-Ngai loved her father with such love that she had refused 100 worthy suitors rather than make his home desolated by her absence. And when she had seen the awful yellow missive, sealed with the dragon's seal, she fainted away with fear for her father's sake. And when her senses and her strength returned to her, she could not rest or sleep for thinking of her parents' danger, until she had secretly sold some of her jewels, and with the money so obtained had hastened to an astrologer, and paid him a great price to advise her by what means her father might be saved from the peril impending over him. So the astrologer made observations of the heavens, and marked the aspect of the silver stream, which we call the Milky Way, and examined the sign of the zodiac, the Wang Tao or Yellow Road, and consulted the table of the five Hin, or principles of the universe, and the mystical books of the alchemist. And after a long silence, he made answer to her, saying, Gold and brass will never meet in wedlock. Silver and iron never will embrace, until the flesh of a maiden be melted in the crucible, until the blood of the virgin be mixed with the metals in their fusion. So Kongai returned home sorrowful at heart, but she kept secret all that she had heard, and told no one what she had done. At last came the awful day when the third and last effort to cast the great bell was to be made, and Kongai, together with her waiting women, accompanied her father to the foundry, and they took their places upon a platform overlooking the toiling of the moulders and the lava of liquefied metal. All the workmen wrote all at their task in silence. There was no sound heard but the muttering of the fires. The muttering deepened into a roar like the roar of typhoons approaching, and the blood-red lake of metal slowly brightened like the vermilion of a sunrise, and the vermilion was transmuted into a radiant glow of gold, and the gold whitened blindingly, like the silver face of a full moon. Then the workers ceased to feed the raving flame, and all fixed their eyes upon the eyes of Kuan Yu, and Kuan Yu prepared to give the signal to cast, but ere ever he lifted his finger, a cry caused him to turn his head, and all heard the voice of Ko-Ngai sounding sharply sweet as a bird's song above the great thunder of the fires. "For thy sake, O my father!" And even as she cried, she leaped into the white flood of metal, and the lava of the furnace roared to receive her, and sputtered monstrous like flakes of flame to the roof, and burst over the verge of the earthen crater, and cast up a whirling fountain of many-colored fires, and subsided quakingly with lightnings and with thunders and with mutterings. Then the father of Ko-Ngai, wild with his grief, would have leaped in after her, but that strong man held him back and kept firm grasp upon him until he had fainted away, and they could bear him like one dead to his home. And the serving woman of Ko-Ngai, dizzy and speechless for pain, stood before the furnace, still holding in her hands a shoe, a tiny dainty shoe, with embroidery of pearls and flowers. The shoe of her beautiful mistress that was, for she had sought to grasp Ko-Ngai by the foot as she leaped, but had only been able to clutch the shoe, and the pretty shoe came off of her hand, and she continued to stare at it like one gone mad. But in spite of all these things, the command of the celestial and august had to be obeyed, and the work of the moulders to be finished, hopeless as the result might be. Yet the glow of the metal seemed purer and whiter than before, and there was no sign of the beautiful body that had been entombed therein. So the ponderous casting was made, and lo, when the metal had become cool, it was found that the bell was beautiful to look upon, and perfect in form, and wonderful in color above all other bells. Nor was there any trace found of the body of Ko-Ngai, for it had been totally absorbed by the precious alloy, and blended with the well-blended brass and gold, with the intermingling of silver and iron. And when they sounded a bell, its tones were found to be deeper and mellower and mightier than the tones of any other bell, reaching even beyond the distance of 100 li, like a pealing of summer thunder, and yet also like some vast voice uttering a name, a woman's name, the name of Ko-Ngai, and still, between each mighty stroke, there is a long, low moaning heard, and ever the moaning ends with a sound of sobbing and of complaining, as though a weeping woman should murmur, "Hiai." And still, when the people hear the great golden moan, they keep silence. But when the sharp, sweet shuddering comes in the air, and the sobbing of Hiai, then indeed do all Chinese mothers in all the many-colored ways of Peking whisper to their little ones, "Listen, that is Ko-Ngai crying for her shoe. That is Ko-Ngai calling for her shoe." So since that is the end of our story, so we are going to answer some questions. First, why was the story given the title The Soul of the Great Bell? So the story is given the title The Soul of the Great Bell because Kungai sacrificed herself as the astrologer said. So the bell rang or sounded perfectly. It was pleasant to the ear. It was called the soul of the great bell because of the sacrifice of the daughter did. So the daughter referred to this is Ko-Ngai. So she sacrificed herself. That's why the story is given the title The Soul of the Great Bell. So, what is the moral lesson of the story? The moral lesson is sometimes we made a decision just to sacrifice our life because of unconditional love. Like Ko-Ngai, she gave herself for the love to his father. So there are other times that we have encountered in real life as well. This teaches readers that the ones they love always have to take the opportunity and make sacrifices. The story tells how they value the importance of family. So, what other Chinese traditions involve bells? So, bells are considered luck items in Chinese traditions. Bells are rung 108 times to begin a grand celebration. So, the digits are derived from the idea of 12 months, 24 solar terms, and 72 Hou, 5 days a Hou. So, on the Chinese lunar calendar, which means 108 worries will be removed from people. So, like the Philippines, so while in the Philippines, the bells are hung at the top of the churches and you can hear it rung when it's Sunday. So, whenever there are weddings, baptisms, or when the Pope visits the country, and many more that is related to churches. So, last question. What values or traditions are common to both Filipino and Chinese? So, first one, we have a believer of horoscopes. So, both Chinese and mostly Filipinos are believer of lucky numbers and lucky colors. Sometimes these also affect their attitude toward things in daily basis. So, we also believe in zodiac sign and zodiac system. So, both Chinese and Filipinos believe in zodiac signs and zodiac system. And the second one, we have love for parents. So Ko-Ngai is the best representation of a loving daughter. Both the Chinese and Filipinos value their parents more than anyone else. So both are willing to sacrifice anything for their parents in the name of family or in the name of their love for their family. So next one we have celebration of Chinese New Year. So as part of the Chinese influence, Filipinos also celebrate Chinese New Year annually and now became a Filipino tradition. So there's a place in the Philippines commonly known as the Chinatown in Binondo, which is festive during the said celebration. So we Filipinos also celebrate Chinese New Year, so especially Chinatown located in Binondo, Metro Manila. Then we are also both family oriented, so both Filipino and Chinese. So the Chinese ideal family for generations living together symbolizes the ideals of harmony, happiness, longevity, and a large thriving family. In the Filipino tradition, if a man ever marries a woman, you also marry the family. It is also common that a Filipino family get to live with their families, with the families of their husbands or their wives. So, Feng Shui, next one. So, Chinese and most of the Filipinos believe that Feng Shui is important and very helpful to live a healthy and prosperous life. Then we also have, so both Chinese and Filipinos have festivals. So here in the Philippines, we have different festivals in different places in our country. Same as with the Chinese culture. They also have different festivals such as Dragon Boat Festival, Lantern Festival, the 24 solar turns, etc. So, next one, we respect the earlier release. So, mano po, the usage of opo and po are part of the Filipino values. Chinese also have this kind of value, although it is not necessary. The usage of po and opo, this is this also signifies respect to the elders. In China, they do not say ni hao to elders, rather they use nin hao since nin means respect. And practice during New Year celebration. So preparing pancit that symbolizes long life, coins for wealth, and get rice in a bowl with rolled paper money for wealth prosperity, wearing something red during New Year's night. Wedding ceremony. The Chinese wedding these days is almost the same as that of Filipinos. There is much Filipino influence on local Chinese weddings. Even if the two families are not Christians, the wedding almost always is in a church, Catholic or Protestant, with all the religious ceremonies and the presence of sponsors. So next one we have funeral. So improper funeral arrangement is a sign of being disrespectful for both Filipino and Chinese. So generally, it is part of the values and traditions of both the Filipino and Chinese is that they give importance to the values and traditions that their community has. So that is the end of our discussion for today. So if you have any questions, just contact me at my cell phone number or you can visit the Gait FE learning site. Thank you and God bless.